Hey there, my name's Pat Millay. So the first priest that I ever worked with, the first pastor at the first church I ever worked for, like 20 years ago, um, he, during the time that I worked there, bought his own casket. Like the casket that he is going to be buried in when he dies, which has not happened yet, thank goodness. He bought it and he just put it in his bedroom at the foot of his bed. And he would put stuff on it and he would sit on it to put his shoes on in the morning. And I was a little confused at the time. But since then, it's made me think of this thing that Roman generals used to do after they won a war or a battle. They would have their kind of victory parade through whatever city or countryside that they just conquered. And throughout this triumphant parade, where they're celebrating this great achievement and how amazing they are as a Roman nation and as a leader of battle, as this general, every general would have a servant or a person riding along right behind him or right beside him, the whole time whispering in his ear, "Remember that you are a man." And again, that makes me think of this phrase that we use in our Catholic tradition, Memento Mori, remember your death. So much so, actually, for us as Catholics, that right now, if you went to a church in Rome, if you got on a plane, not right now, but after this whole coronavirus thing passes, you could go to Rome and you could go to a church called Santa Maria della Concezione. And there's a crypt in that church that is decorated with the skulls and bones of more than 4,000 Capuchin friars over the course of about 300 years. It's insane and it's macabre and it is really interesting. And it makes you think, like, why would somebody do that? Like, what would drive someone to decorate a church, a crypt, with bones and skulls? Like, isn't that like dark or really weird or morbid or even like demonic, like kind of scary, evil in some sense, right? I thought about this actually a few months ago when I went to go see Frozen 2 with my little kids for the first time. And I had coffee with a friend earlier before we went, and she had told me just to like be aware going in that the movie has some kind of like grief related, death related elements, right? That there's a lot of like heavy themes in Frozen 2. And I told her at the time, I was thinking like, it's kind of funny for our family who is Catholic that we actually talk to our kids about death a lot, right? And we have like crucifixes of a dead God, up on the wall every time we come to our house or go to church. We talk about martyrs and sometimes even relatively gruesome deaths, not in like great detail, they're little kids, but still. We talk about our loved ones who have died. We talk about our own death someday. So it's not foreign to our kids. So I knew that going in to see Frozen 2. And it was really interesting, actually. Whatever you may think about Frozen 2, there's a lot of really interesting ways that it deals with death and mortality and impermanence, right? Olaf himself actually is a really ironic sign of impermanence in the movie. So here's a snowman who is like the image of impermanent passing things, right? Like a snowman doesn't last for more than like a week unless you live in Minnesota like I do, when it could be 6 months. But in the movie, he's permanent. He's been made permanent by Elsa. So he already is kind of ironic a little bit. And early in the movie, you get the sense that he's contemplating like deep, eternal things, like everything changes, nothing is permanent, it all comes to an end. And there's actually a song at the beginning of the movie called Some Things Never Change. And it's an incredibly ironic song because in the song, there's these lists of things that actually change, right? There's a line like an old stone wall that will never fall. And as Olaf's running along the stone wall that will never fall, it starts to crumble, right? Because that wall is going to fall someday. Some things never change. When the reality for us as humans in a broken world is that everything changes. It's all going to change. We are going to change day by day, decade by decade. There's a point where Kristoff tries to propose to Anna a bunch of times, but one of the times he just can't get out of his own way. He's fumbling over his own words, and they're in kind of a dangerous mission, right? So he says, "In case we die," and Anna freaks out, right? And says, "We're going to die." And he says, no, we're not going to die. Not like right now, like way, way in the future, we will die, right? They later in the movie, they find, Anna and Elsa find the actual ship where their parents died in Frozen 1, which again, it's a Disney movie, so they just have to kill off the parents and then they move on with the rest of the movie. They find that ship and they grieve their parents' loss. They figure out why they died. And right before Olaf dies, toward the end of the movie, he says to Anna, "Hey, Anna, I just thought of one thing that's permanent." She says, "What's that?" And he says, "Love." Now, this is the same Olaf who in Frozen 1 quoted St. Thomas Aquinas by defining love as putting someone else's needs before yours, right? Doing the good for the other as other. So in this movie, Frozen 2, Olaf correctly identifies the one thing that is permanent, that love is permanent. Love never ends, no matter whether we're in this life or the next. And I've been thinking that a lot this week, just in the midst of our own quarantine and our own real genuine issues and struggles with this crisis around the coronavirus. Because the deal is this: sanity and reason happen when we are aligned with reality and truth, when our inside is aligned with what's true on the outside. And the reality, the truth, is that we are all going to die, every one of us. Now, that was not a part of God's original plan. That was not the way it was meant to be. Before Adam and Eve's fall, there was no death. There were no hurricanes. There were no diseases. There was no coronavirus. There was no divorce. There was no heartbreak. This was not part of God's original plan. Through our own sin, we actually brought this into the world. Because of the sins of humans, death is a reality. We brought death into the world. Our relationship with God, our relationships with each other, our relationship with nature and creation, and even our very lives were broken through our own sinfulness. That's the reality. It's insanity to ignore it, to try to avoid it, to pretend it's not real. All the millions of ways that we distract ourselves from that reality with just distraction after distraction, thing after thing, event after event, Netflix shows and video games and sports and activities and work and you name it. We'll find a way to not think about these greater things about our life, to not remember our death. At this stage of my life, honestly, I think about death, my death, every day of my life. And it's not this crushing thing, right? There are moments certainly where I lack a certain trust in God. And then death does take on a weight that it doesn't have to. But in the moments where I trust God, there's no reason to be afraid of death in the sense that we think about it most of the time. Death doesn't become the enemy if I trust God. Death takes on a purpose and a meaning. Death gives my life purpose and meaning, actually. And it motivates me to prepare for death really well. This is that strange and kind of providential gift that this coronavirus crisis has given us right now. This opportunity to memento mori, to remember my death. And it's true ambivalence, right? Like we feel two things at the same time. On the one hand, death is terrible. It's the worst thing about life. It's the enemy, the opponent of everything that's good about life. It's the opponent of love, of life, of family, of friendships, of joy, of freedom. Death is the worst. It's the enemy. It's the opposite of goodness. So that's why we do everything we can as people of faith to protect life, to fight against death. That's why we take tangible steps in this current crisis to quarantine and to socially distance ourselves from one another out of love for those who are most vulnerable, even if it's not us. That's why we fight abortion and the death penalty and euthanasia and oppression and violence and war and any kind of threat against life, because death is terrible. And yet, on the other hand, death is not the enemy in the ultimate sense. Death has actually been defeated, so it can't be the enemy anymore. St. Paul says that the last enemy to be defeated is death, and it has been in the cross and the resurrection. So because of that, death is a doorway now. Death isn't just the worst part of life. Death is now the way we get to life in the fullest sense. So on one hand, we as people of faith, it's a moral imperative for us to take real actions to protect the lives of others in this COVID-19 crisis. And on the other hand, we ask ourselves the wrong question sometimes. We ask ourselves the question, will I die? Will this virus kill me? Will I die? And that's not a bad question, but a better question, honestly, is probably, will I die this way? Because here's the deal, right? COVID-19 could kill me. It could. And if it doesn't, something else will. cancer, a heart attack, a car accident, something awesome like a shark attack or a mountain climbing accident. I don't know. Something is going to kill me, whether it's this virus or something else. What that means is that I have an obligation to consider the weight of that, the depth of that, and to look at my life in relationship to it. If I died tonight, are there relationships with other people that would go unreconciled? If I died tonight, would my relationship with God be where I want it to be, where I desire it to be before I meet him face to face? If I died tonight, are there things about my life, hopes and dreams left unfulfilled? Jesus talks about this in Scripture all the time. The way to look at our death is to be prepared. Not like Scar, right? But like a saint, to be prepared, to be ready for death at any point in time, to be ready for that transition to new life at any point when it comes. We have no idea the day or the hour, but we have to be prepared. Olaf knew that. St. Paul knows that in 1 Corinthians, right? He says, these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. He was talking about the permanence of love, the fact that God is love and heaven is God. So heaven is just love eternally, forever, the way it was meant to be in the first place. So memento mori, remember your death, even in scary and difficult times like this, knowing that God has defeated death and that you have access to true life, true joy, true freedom, and true meaning through his sacrifice and resurrection. I'm praying for you all. God bless you.